Good morning. Good morning. What a joy it is to be in the house of the Lord again today to bring you the Sunday school lesson. And I've got a good lesson. I hope you're going to enjoy it. So, as I said last Sunday, I was so excited about Pentecost, and I've still been thinking about that all this week. And Pastor said, she just got right up in that thing and said, it's Pentecost Sunday. Well, today I'm going to talk about how we need to have courage in this time that you and I are living in this day. Now, before we get into our lesson, as always, I want us to pray. Some very dear friends of ours, the Black family, Linda Black, she is just very, very sick, and she needs prayer, and her family, their caregivers, need prayer. And then Pastor was just telling me about 3 or 4 different ministers in our church. Brother Melvin Massey is very critically ill today, and then others. 2 or 3 that he mentioned that were having heart issues today and this week. So let's remember them in our prayers. And then our churches and all the ministries of our churches, our families that are being torn apart by the things that are going on in the world today. And of course, our country is still in such turmoil. We really do need to be remembering our country and our leaders as they are endeavoring to try to get some of this, what I call nonsense, evil stuff that's going on. I just pray that God gives them the wisdom of how to handle all of this stuff. So let's pray. Father, I love you today, and I come to you with hurt in my heart for those who are so gravely ill physically, and then those, Lord, that are even worse, ill in the spirit today and that need a healing from your hand today. Lord, I pray for our churches and the ministers and our country and the leaders in our country. I pray for wisdom and knowledge that you will give to them that they will be able to deal with all the unrest that's going on in our country. But Lord, like so many Christians today, I know that only you can heal such disruption and such sorrow and such anger and bitterness and hatred that's in our world today. And then always remember, Lord, that you told us in the last days that there would be perilous times. So I just pray for a healing for our nation. And Lord, as I teach your word today, I need the anointing of the Holy Spirit as I teach your word today. Give me the words to say that would be uplifting to others, but most of all, it would honor you, because my goal is to honor you with my teaching and with my life. I want to be an example that you would have me to be. So just touch all of us today. Help us learn more about how to be courageous in you. And we'll be so very, very careful to give you all the praise and all the honor for everything that's accomplished. For I pray in the name of Christ. Amen. Now, we're going to talk about Esther in the Bible today. You go to the book of Esther, and it's a beautiful story. It has some very uneasy times and some very cruel times, but oh, how it ends with the beauty of the Lord, because Esther was there for, as it was said, for as a time like this. And in times like we're living today, we need people who will stand by the Lord and who will stand on the word. So I want us to just keep it in our minds today now that we're going to learn to be more courageous. We're going to stand on the word, and we're going to be bold in the Lord. Our lesson comes from Esther 3, 4, 7, and then 8. So we skip around in the whole book, Esther 3 and 8. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people, neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasures. Now, I just want to stop right there just for a minute, because I might not think of this when I get on down to this verse, because you know me, I have to stop when I have a thought. There are people today that are disrupting peaceful protests and peaceful gatherings. They are hid in the back, and they are being paid to do these things, to cause unrest and to cause uprisings, just like in the Bible days. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, The silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. In Esther 4:15. Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. And then Esther 7:5. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, Who is he? And where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And then in Esther 8:7. Then King Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now, the story of Esther always sparks our interest regarding the fact that God is always working on our behalf. And all of these times it's going on now, God is still working for his people. He's not going to let us be destroyed. The Israelites, the Jews, got in trouble a lot of times, and they were in captivity many times. But God never intended for them to be destroyed. Nothing takes him by surprise. He already has a plan and the right people in the right place. And today, God has the right people in the right place and at the right time. Not once is his name mentioned in the entire book of Esther. You don't hear the word God or the name of God mentioned in the entire book. Yet we see his plans for his people demonstrated in the most critical of times. He can and does always accomplish his purposes regardless of the circumstances. One thing we clearly see is what the enemy determined to do evil to Esther's people, God turns around to Haman's own demise. We also are reminded again that God never intended, like I said, for his people to be destroyed. Have you wondered, like me, or maybe even have said, like I've said in these past few weeks, how long is God going to allow this to go on? How long is it going to be until God says that is enough? I've thought it, I've said it. We can rest assured he won't allow his people to be destroyed. When we're called upon to act in the face of great opposition, how courageous are we really willing to be? Do we allow the Spirit to provide courage to follow Christ in the difficult times? We need to focus on that. The fact that courage is necessary in following the Lord, and we need to submit to his plan for us. We make plans, but sometimes God disrupts our plans because our plan that we made was made without his knowledge ahead of time, because he always knows what's going to happen tomorrow and the next day and the next day. He knows what's going to be happening. And sometimes we make plans and we don't really know what tomorrow's going to bring. When we really look at our lives today, I wonder, have we been really strong when the enemy attacks us? Or do we want others to fight the battle for us? A lot of people, like I told you a week or so ago, I mentioned to you about praying for yourself. People will say, oh, would you please pray for me? I'm having such a bad time. And you say, did you pray for yourself? Well, no. Well, why not? You can tell God all about your problems. Now, courage is an easy word to say, but it's much more difficult to understand and to demonstrate. It's easy to tell someone now, you just got to have some courage here. You just got to be strong. The biblical account of Esther stands as a phenomenal example of courage in the face of some of the most personal issues and times of, in the face of personal and even national death. She stood in the gap. Just her. One woman. Okay, girls, think about this. One woman stood in the gap. You say, now, Shirley, we're just women. No, we're not just women. If you're a woman of God, you should realize that you can be very, very powerful. You can have a lot of courage. There is no one else that could save her people. How many times have you made this statement? And I've made this statement many, many times, that I would step between either one of my children and death anytime. And I mean that. I meant that from my heart. I have even prayed when our daughter Gina was so gravely ill. I thought to myself, and I even said to God, why can't it be me and not her? She's young. But you know, God always has a plan. Courage doesn't mean being without fear. It doesn't mean that you won't have some fear, that you won't get really concerned, but courage pushes aside that fear, and it willingly takes a risk in order to protect others. Now, most of us don't like to take a risk. We say, well, have you ever heard that? Let's see if I can get this quote correct. A bird in hand is better than two in the bush, something like that. And I probably said that all wrong. But anyway, you get the message. Courage never should be confused with recklessness either. Now, there are some people that just fly into anything and they just act any old stupid way, and they said, oh, those people are very courageous. Well, they didn't accomplish anything. They were just reckless, even though the circumstances may be questionable to the majority of the people around, and the person might stand alone while attempting to make a difference. But he didn't talk to God and say, God, what do you want me to do? I don't want to do this in a reckless manner. I want to accomplish something. If it hadn't been for Esther's actions, there would have been no Ezra and no Jews to return to Jerusalem, as recorded in Ezra 7 and 10. We also would never have heard of Nehemiah and his going back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls that had been destroyed by the Babylonians. Think about that. No Ezra and no Jews to go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the city. And then we never would have heard of Nehemiah and how he's going to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls that had been destroyed by the Babylonians, and how his courageous reconstruction project happened very, very quickly. Besides emphasizing the role of a courageous queen saving her people from annihilation, Esther's story reminds us of the positions many of God's people held in the empires of antiquity. Joseph rose to second in command in Egypt. Daniel and his 3 Hebrew companions held major administrative positions in the Babylonian Empire. Daniel became one of the 3 governors of the Medo-Persian Empire in Daniel 6, 1 and 3. Esther followed this line of individuals who distinguished themselves in the political, and I circled political because I'm going to tell you something that I heard, while maintaining their relationship with God. They all stayed close to God, even though they held political positions. I heard a pastor say from the pulpit one time, that you can't be in politics and be a Christian. God forbid that people are ever convinced that you can't be a politician and be a Christian. What we need in our world today is more politicians who are devout Christians. Have you ever reacted without thinking about it when you saw someone in danger? See, Mordecai, Esther's uncle, took his time. He got word from God, and then he sent a message to Esther, and Esther took her time, and they moved on God's timetable. Too many times we want to move on our timetable, but we don't react without thinking about it. Sometimes if you see something happening and you don't even think about it, you just jump in and react to it, you can cause more trouble than you did good. Evil intended against the Jews in Esther 3, 1 through 15. Now, Esther was chosen queen from the candidates representing 127 provinces of the expansive Persian Empire. Now listen to this, girls. After a year of skin and beauty treatments, each virgin in turn went to the king to spend the evening and night with him. Mordecai, Esther's adopted father and blood cousin, carefully instructed her not to reveal the fact that she was a Jew. This became a major factor in the unfolding events that would take place. He said, "Do not tell the king that you are a Jew." Then there was the man that was so evil, whose name was Haman. And he got jealous because the Jewish people began to grow in their captivity. There was more and more of them. And Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down, nor did he reverence. Then Haman was filled with wrath. If we begin in the 5th verse in the 3rd chapter of Esther, and in chapter 3 introduces Haman, who became a major player in the rest of the entire story of Esther. Now, King Ahasuerus promoted him to a prestigious position of chief over all the princes of the empire. Now, in recognition of his office, the king's servants bowed in submission to Haman as per the king's command. But there was one exception, a man of God. He didn't bow to Haman because Mordecai refused to bow because he was God's person. Some people will bow to anything. I heard last night on some of the newscasts talking about all the mayors and all these people in positions, how they are going out and they are bowing with the people, the protesters and those that are causing so much trouble. And instead of standing firm and saying, look, I sympathize with you, but I'm not going to bow down here to you, because the newscasters were saying to them that was a sense that they were just agreeing, or they were just not going to do what they needed to do to protect their city. Maybe Mordecai perceived this bowing to be the sin of idolatry. I mean, Haman was just another man. And see, the decree was that all the servants would bow before him, but Mordecai refused to bow. And it infuriated Haman because Mordecai didn't bow to him, and he got so angry. Other members of the court even asked Mordecai concerning his disobedience to the king's command. And verse 4 seems to suggest that Mordecai's revealing his Jewish status was something that he wasn't going to do in front of Haman. Haman's extreme anger doesn't seem to be out of order. This man disrespects the king's command, Haman's position, and Haman personally. Mordecai's refusal to bow automatically plows a huge personal chasm. In other words, it made Haman so angry that he started a plan to get rid of him. Do you realize today that Satan, when we refuse to bow to Satan, and he sees that we as Christians will only bow to our living God, he becomes very angry and he tries to destroy us. Now, one writer wrote this, and I really do like it. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. It means a strong desire to live, taking the form of a readiness to die. He wasn't going to bow to him, even if it meant his life. He was not going to bow to him. Do you know that in some parts of the world, in days gone by, if you didn't bow and denounce God, you gave your life. But people would not bow, and they gave their life for the cause of God. And then we pick up in our lesson text today where Haman went to the king, and he told him, he said, there's a certain people scattered abroad. So he didn't even know they were Jews. He said they're scattered abroad, and they're dispersed among the people in all the provinces of the kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all the people, neither keep they the king's laws, and therefore it's not for the king's profit to suffer them. And then, listen to this. His rage at Mordecai's disrespect causes him to be unwilling to seek revenge on the man alone. He didn't want to just get revenge on Mordecai. He wanted to destroy all these people because he was afraid they were going to take over the country. They were just going to go back to Jerusalem in their time that God said go back. In verse 6, he wants to destroy all the Jews scattered throughout the provinces, and since the overthrow of their nation, he just wanted to do away with all of them. Some 125 years have passed since the first invasion and captivity, and then the Jews have multiplied and they've prospered. Do you know that God always prospers his people? It doesn't matter where we are or where they were. God always prospered them. Does this sound like the hatred that's being manifest in our country today? Because of one poor man's death, look at all that's going on. And it's being prompted by people in the background. Peaceful protests that are going on. People that just want answers. There are people in the background who are inciting them, and they bring out all the worst, and they cause the problems like Haman did. He seeks, verse 7 indicates that Haman seeks the gods, not God, but the gods' direction, his idol gods, as to how this program of destruction should begin. Every time the enemy attacks you, it is not a spur of the moment thing. He always has a plan. Just like God has a plan, the enemy will look at you and he will catch you in a very vulnerable time. Maybe you've been sick physically. Maybe you've had a great loss in your family. And during this pandemic that we've all been going through and trying to get through that, and you get weak and you get weary from all the things that are going on, and the devil devises a plan, just like Haman devised a plan. So the casting of lots determined that it would begin nearly a year later. It was going to take 11 months from the time of developing this deceitful, murderous plan. He was going to take his time. So it didn't look like he just went out and did something on the spur of the moment. In verses 8 and 9 describes the manner in which Haman presents the plan to the king. First, he indicates how widespread the Jews are scattered throughout the empire. Indirectly, it speaks of a large population. Haman does not indicate their specific identity. He didn't tell them. He just said it's a group of there's certain people that are scattered abroad. He didn't say it was Jews. He said just this certain people. The enemy will come at you and he won't tell you everything. He'll just tell you this certain person is trying to destroy you. Well, he causes division. So, now, then he says these people don't fit in with the rest of the citizens. Then, third, by indicating their laws were different, he suggests the possibility of treasonable actions. They might just rise up against us. He suggests the possibility that they may try to overthrow the king's kingdom. It's an underhanded way to use their spiritual and religious laws against them. And that's what Satan does. He tries to destroy the church every way he can. His bottom line, this situation is unhealthy and it shouldn't be allowed to continue. We just need to get rid of them. Haman sweetens the deal by offering to put 10,000 talents of silver into the king's treasury. And the millions of dollars today is what that would amount to. Ahasuerus had been defeated twice by the Greeks in previous years. And now here's another campaign that Haman's telling him that, if we don't do something with these people, there's no telling what they'll do. So, and we'll put money in, millions of dollars. He really wanted to get rid of the Jews. And if I said he didn't know they were Jews, I'm sorry, I backtrack a minute. He didn't tell the king they were Jews. He just told them a certain people. Can I just remind all of us that Satan's really working to destroy all of us? He wants to destroy us. And what better way to do it than cause division in our country and in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our own families? Haman sought and found an opportunity. But what he didn't know is there was a little maiden named Esther that the king was very, very fond of. God put her in the right place at the right time. You might be that person if you'll just show your courage and be courageous. You might be that man, woman, boy, or girl that God will just put in a certain place for, as the word says, for such a time as this. You may be there to ward off the enemy. You may be the one that disrupts the plan of the enemy. So then the king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman and told him, and the king said to Haman, the silver is given to thee, the people also to do with them as seemeth good to thee. In other words, he was giving them the people. This certain people, he said, they are yours to do whatever you choose to do with them. And the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces. There were letters written as to what was going to be taking place to destroy, to kill, or to cause to perish all the Jews, young and old, little children, women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month. As he's going to work at it for 11 months. You say, oh God, how long is this going to last? I am in such a, Lord, I just cannot deal with this much longer, Lord. Please tell me, Lord, how much longer is this going to last? And God says, you just stay faithful and you stay courageous. And one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey. No king would stand by idly while a potentially destructive force fomented his kingdom or his empire. And that's where Haman knew he could get to the king. All he had to do was tell him that they might overthrow his king. And this was really true of a king looking to expand his kingdom again, because the Greeks had already disrupted him twice. They'd previously defeated him, and now he's ready to rebuild his kingdom. So if the prince, who was elevated above all the provincial princes, identified a group of people as being detrimental to the country, then it would be wise to follow his advice. I mean, here's Haman. He's been put in a position, and Ahasuerus didn't think about what he might try to do. Notifying this widespread province of the destructive deadline would take a concentrated effort by the king's scribes. They didn't have cell phones, and they didn't have internet to send it all out in one day. It had to be delivered over all the provinces. So the letters were written and sealed with the king's ring. Verse 12 indicates the various categories of people who'd been contacted. All the people that were in position, he sent letters to them telling them what was going to be doing. There was more than 100 provincial governors and a large number of tribal leaders within the provinces. And so these notifications had to be produced in many languages that were spoken. And, you know, there's a notification seal by the blood of Christ that says you can be free and live. You see, there is a notification that God has sent to us. Like Haman was sending out all these notifications, God sent us through his son Christ one notification that was sealed by the son's blood that says you don't have to die and you don't have to be in bondage. You can be free and you can live and you can grow in me. And you know, and once the notifications had been sealed with the king's ring, they were sent by individual couriers and they could not be denied. You cannot deny what Christ said that you can have. On the 13th day of the 12th month of the Jewish calendar, our March, there was to be wholesale slaughter of all the Jews, regardless of age and gender. We would call it genocide. There was no exemption for women or children. It was to be a violent eradication. Listen, people are saying today, they are trying to destroy our country. They may destroy this country, but they won't destroy God's people. The rioters, those who are inciting riots, those who are inciting all the looting and the burning and the destruction of property, and even now taking people's lives. And people say, oh, what if they come to our town? They did come to our town a few days ago, and I got a little note somewhere here where my daughter called me this past week. I guess it was like maybe on Tuesday, I think. Anyway, she called and she said, Mom, what are you and Dad doing? And I thought, oh Lord, what's happened now? She had this sense of urgency in her voice. She said, what are you and Dad doing? I said, well, we're just around the house here. We've been, working around the house. I worked today. She said, well, don't go to town. She said, don't y'all dare go downtown Jasper. I said, Rhonda, what in the world is going on? There are protesters coming in. They're going to have a big protest, going to have a march. And then all of these things were told, and as it turned out, it was very peaceful. But when you hear about these things, there's a sense of urgency. And you say, that don't have anything to do with our lesson today. Anything that teaches us, if something is going to happen that may cause us problems, we should listen with a sense of urgency in our hearing. Listen, when I read all this, I made this little note to myself and I said, did this speak to me? You know it did. There were notices of impending destruction of God's people. Today, there are thousands of missionaries carrying the good news of the gospel all over the world to the lost, telling them of the glorious salvation that is afforded to them and offered them to them through Jesus Christ. Now, these letters were being sent to the provinces to tell those in charge that there was going to be an eradication of these Jews. But today, the notices that are being carried out are notices to people that, hey, Christ died for you. And there is a way of escape from this world and from the problems in this world. And all you have to do is accept salvation. Now, on the 13th day of the month, like I said, which would be March, this when it's all going to happen. Now, it took 11 months to plan it. 11 months to plan it. Do you know how quickly God can come to our rescue? On a moment's notice. Somebody may have been, you may have thought, well, this person has been after me as long as I can remember. But you know what? If you have the courage to pray and ask the Lord, God, would you please take care of this? He can take care of it instantaneously. In verse 15, Haman and Ahasuerus were celebrating. More than likely, they were wondering what lies behind such a destructive decree. They were wondering what's going on. You know, how are things going? How long is it going to be? Haman is telling the way I look at it, Haman probably telling the king, it won't be long now. You don't have to worry about anything. I have taken care of it. When somebody tells me something, if I've got an issue that is very important to me, if someone comes along and said, you don't have to worry about that anymore, I've got it taken care of, and I'm like, really? You can take care of that for me? I don't think so. But then when I have this real issue and God says, you don't have to worry about that, I'm taking care of that for you. Esther's courageous act. Oh, let me read you this little quote. Do not ask for fears to be removed. Oh God, take this away. I'm so afraid. God, could you please take this fear out of my life? This writer said, ask for courage equal to the fears. We want God to remove everything that comes our way. It's like, a few days ago, there was a bulldog out in the street in front of our house. Kenny and I were sitting on the porch, and he said, "Oh, that's the dog that came in our carport to visit the other day." And I said, "That dog was the one?" He said, "That's the one." I'm thinking, "Oh my word, that's a bulldog." I would not have gone out in the garage. I said, "What'd you do?" He said, "I just walked out there and told him to get out of that garage and go on home." And he just turned around and left. But what we do most of the time, if we have real problems or there's something that we're really afraid of. Now listen, am I telling you that you should not have any sort of fear at all? There are fears that will make you wiser and will make you be more careful. Don't go someplace that you know you could get into trouble or you could be harmed. But we ask God to remove the fears rather than, God, give me courage equal to this fear. Give me the courage to stand in the sight of this fear. Now, if you go to the 4th chapter of Esther, upon hearing of the royal decree, now Mordecai, you got to remember this was, he was Esther's adopted father. Listen to what he did. He found out about the decree. He tears his clothes, puts ashes on his head, dons sackcloth, which is the normal acts of Oriental mourning. He then walks through the city, uttering audible cries of anguish. He stops just outside the entrance of the king's palace. Verse 3 points to the Jews' great anguish, which included fasting and laying in ashes. Esther doesn't learn about the decree until she inquires about the reason for Mordecai's mourning. One of her attendants, Hatash, talks with Mordecai, who gave him a copy of the decree and instructions for Esther. She's to go to the king and attempt to intercede for their people. Now, how really concerned are we about what is happening in our nation today? Is it just something that we see on the news, or have we really, really prayed about it? I guarantee you, if these things, if there was every night, if there was protest, rioting, looting, burning buildings in the city of Jasper, all of us who live around would be on our knees begging God to intervene for us. But when it's in another city, too often times we say, Well, that's in New York. That's big cities. And you know what I said to Kenny after I told him that what our daughter had called and said? I said, why would they come to a little rural town like Jasper? Why would they come here? He said, I don't know. But you know what? The enemy doesn't care where you're in a big city or a rural town where there's not very many people. The enemy is going to try to destroy you wherever you are. So we got to take courage in the Lord. Now, Mordecai found out he got a copy of the decree about destroying all the Jews. He knows Esther's in the right place where she can be of help. And he's willing to ask her. And one of her attendants went to Mordecai to find out what was wrong with him. She's his uncle, but she's also his adopted father. And she wants to know what's wrong with him. Just like if one of your relatives, you see them crying and they're really upset, the first thing you want to know is what is wrong? What's going on? So he gave a copy of the decree to her attendant and gave instructions for Esther for her to go to the king and attempt to intercede for the people. There's a good thing to think about, people. Christ is sitting at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for us today. He's there. He's telling, like if we have a big problem, he says, now, Father, you know I've already paid the price, so I'm interceding for them. And what does interceding mean? He's talking on our behalf. And that's what he wanted Esther to do. So then she spoke to her attendant again and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come into the king in the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. Now they fasted for 30 days, but the king has not called for Esther to come into his court. She said, I've not been called for 30 days to go in to see the king. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. But then the Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape the king's house more than all the Jews. In other words, if they destroy all the Jews, they're going to find out you're a Jew and you're going to die too. So you got to have courage, child. You just got to have courage. Sometimes it takes courage to just stand for the Lord. To just be willing to say, well, if I get laughed at, or if I get talked about, or if I get, shamed, it doesn't matter. I am going to have courage, and I'm going to stand for the Lord. And so many of us have gotten to the point that we just don't want to do that. We don't want somebody to say, oh, well, I knew they would do that. Well, didn't anything happen when you went up and stood for the Lord? You don't know. You don't know what happened. You don't know how long. God may not answer that prayer or that request for a few days, and you may have already left before God answered that prayer. But she said, go back and tell Mordecai that all these 30 days that my attendants and we've all been fasting and praying, I've not been called in. And they told Mordecai his words, and then he commanded to answer Esther that don't think about yourself. Don't think you'll escape. When they find out that you are a Jew, you will not escape the king's house. Now, too often we want that one person that can make a difference to be somebody else. They can make a difference. You don't want to be the one person that can make a difference because you don't have enough courage. Well, it's time for all of us to become more determined to allow God to use us as individuals. We have become so accustomed to the church being used as a whole, and we don't want to be used as individuals. He said, for thou altogether holdest thy peace. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And whom knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Mordecai said, your father's house will be destroyed. There will come another an enlargement of Jews from another place. But your father's house will be destroyed, and nobody will ever know that you were in the right place at the right time. At this point, Esther sent the message back to her adopted father, indicating the difficulty of what he asked her to do. Her husband, the king, lives in protected isolation. Can you imagine that? The king was her husband, but he lived in isolation from her. No one has an audience or contact from outside the palace, even his wives, without his personal decision or invitation. Esther understands her delicate situation. She wants to save her people, but she also knows that she is the chosen queen of the empire, but 30 days have passed since her husband's called for her. And if the king doesn't call for you and you go into his presence, you stand a good chance of being killed unless he holds out the golden scepter to you. Now, will you let me just throw in my little, like I tell my Sunday school lesson, will you just let me use my imagination right here? I like to think of this for us like God calls us to take a stand. And we say, well, I've never been in that position before. But God says, don't worry about it. I'm going to hold the golden scepter out to you, which is the blood of Christ. I'm going to give you the power and the word that you have to perform what I need you to do for my kingdom. Mordecai's response points to the reality of what will happen on the date of the decree. Her position will not override her race. And in verse 14, it indicates that even her extended family will be destroyed unless the necessary steps are taken. He states conviction that God will bring deliverance from some other means, since his purposes are not defeated by the silence of one person. The enemy may silence one person in the church or in his kingdom, in God's kingdom. The enemy may manage to silence a leader, but that's not going to destroy God's work, and it is not going to defeat God's purpose. So some people say, well, I know so-and-so, and they used to just be a real outspoken voice for the Lord, but then there some things happened in their life, and all of a sudden you didn't even hear from them anymore. They let the enemy override their desire to work for the Lord. And they just couldn't take it anymore. But it didn't destroy God's purpose, because God will always raise up another one. Maybe she stands as the one who can make the difference of this crucial point in history. And she was. In God's providences, one person can play a critical role in the protection and provision for his people. Sometimes just one person is all it took. And that's true today too. You might feel this deep-seated desire to do something for your church. And maybe you don't know exactly what it is, but you have this urgency that you want to do something to help the church. Just ask the Lord, what is it you want me to do? And you may be the very person that is just standing and the church is just waiting on somebody to move. You know, long years ago, we used to hear this statement in the church, and the pastor maybe would, at the end of the service, was giving an altar, was going to have an altar service, and he'd say, someone really needs to come forward today. Well, how do they know that? Well, you remember last Sunday when I talked about Pentecost, and I talked about how the Holy Spirit will prompt you and prompt the leaders and even just the individuals. Well, a pastor often knows that because the Spirit has prompted him that someone really needs to make a move. And he will maybe just say, one person, and you know who you are. You really need to make a move. And I heard a pastor friend of ours talk about how the day that he accepted the Lord in his life, he said, I was sitting in the back of the church. And he said, I felt like my heart was going to explode. And the pastor kept saying, you know who you are. If you will come forward, there will be others. And he said, when I stepped out into the aisle, he said, others followed me to the altar and accepted God, accepted the provision for salvation that Christ provided so that they could know God and the free pardon of sin. Just one person can make a huge difference. It was like as if Mordecai was telling her, deliverance for the Jews will come. You just won't be the one that God could use. Oh yes, and your family's all gonna die too. But you are the one that God can use. So you really need to think about this. You say, he didn't tell her like that. But that, you see, when she sent back the first message, Mordecai didn't say, well, we'll just let it go. No, he kept talking to her. He kept reminding her that she was the one. Courage we shall need, and for the exercise of it, we have as much reason as necessary if we are soldiers of King Jesus. Charles Spurgeon said that. Courage we shall need in the last days, and I truly do believe we are living in the last days. We need courage more than ever. And then in chapter 4, verses 15 through verses 15, and then in verse 5, which is skipped a little bit in our written text, then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me. Fast for me together, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so shall I go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. Esther said, you gather all the Jews together, all of them. That 3-letter word, A-L-L, not part, all of the Jews that are present in Shushan. And he said, pray 3 days and nights. Don't eat or drink anything. And I and my attendants, my maidens, will be doing likewise. And he said, and then I'll go into the king, which I'm breaking the law. But if I perish, I perish. How many of us have ever said, I'm going to do this for God? It may go against the law, but God is telling me to do this. And if I die, I will just die. And it was so when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court that she obtained favor in his sight. The king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So she drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Esther absolutely could not deny her low status as a Jew under the condemnation of death. On the other hand, she has the high status as a favored young woman, elevated to the position of queen because of Ahasuerus' love for her. And with all of this in mind, she chooses to risk her life in order to save her other people. Would you give your life? Would you be willing to risk? See, I said earlier, we don't like to take risks. Well, what if everything goes wrong? And what if the king gets mad at me? Or what if this doesn't happen? Or what if that, I'm taking a big risk. So what if this doesn't happen? But with all that in mind, she chose to risk her own life in order to save her people. How willing are we to give our lives to save other people? Esther doesn't plunge into this precarious position without proper preparation. Now, there's where a lot of times we make mistakes. Proper preparation. Let's see. If I go in my kitchen to cook a meal, I don't just go in there and open the refrigerator and start throwing this out and that out. I have a plan. And I know what pots I'm going to use. I know which drawer in my kitchen those pots are in. And before I ever get in the kitchen, I've already thought the plan over and I'm making some preparation. Well, when I get in the kitchen, I don't go ahead and, let me use this as a perfect example. I have a skillet that I make my cornbread in. And I have a bowl, one bowl, that I like to mix my meal and all the mixings to make cornbread. I mix them in this one bowl. And then I have this one skillet that I like to make my cornbread in. Well, what if I mixed up everything, but I didn't have my skillet out, and I just dumped it out in the oven? You're laughing. You're almost in the floor laughing. June Cobbin, if you're watching, you say, Aunt Shirley, that would be the biggest mess. We make the biggest mess sometimes because we don't make preparations to do the job that God has called us to do. Have you ever seen somebody try to do something that God told them, or they said God told them to do it, and they had no preparation? You think, don't know about that too much. I don't see any preparation. But Esther was not She may have been young, but she was not naive. She told Mordecai what she needed them to do because she knew that though prayers not specifically stated, fasting was always accompanied by this form of communication with God. Moses fasted during his extended time of communion with God on Mount Sinai. Nehemiah fasted and prayed as he mourned the deplorable conditions of Jerusalem in Nehemiah 1, 4, and 5. Esther 5 opens with a description of the setting in which Esther approaches her husband, King Ahasuerus. Apparently, this is the time for various individuals to approach him, but so he sits on his throne and he has the scepter. And when he saw the king, he immediately extended the golden scepter and invitation to speak with him. You say, the wife had to get permission to speak to the king? Sure did. You say, boy, that wouldn't work at my house. If you had been Esther, that would have been the only way. But see, we look at things like this and we say, that didn't sound right. But that's the way it was. And you say, well, I'll tell you one thing. I just wouldn't have made it. No, and God couldn't have used you. Sometimes we say, is that the way? Somebody tell, now this is the way I feel God would want you to do this. I'm just trying to give you instructions from the Lord. You say, well, I'm just going to do it the way I want to. And that person is probably saying, well, you just go right ahead and do it the way you want to. And it won't work. See, God instructs us sometimes through other people. She touches the tip, symbolizing her acceptance. He accepted her. He addressed her by title and name as he inquired about her request. There has to be reason for her coming without having been called. So he wanted to know what was going on. His pleasure in her can be seen by his willingness to fulfill her desire. Up to the half of the kingdom isn't to be understood as a literal statement. It speaks of his thinking to be a request which he generously can fulfill. When we ask God for directions, he will give us specific directions. This is a lesson to be learned for us. Too often we're asked to do a job and our reply is, sure, I can do that. But we don't really know how. And we don't really ask God's directions either. When you are asked to perform a job in God's kingdom, like in the church, you say, well, let me talk to God about that, and I'm going to ask him for his directions. Esther uses tremendous tact for not immediately, emotionally spilling out the treachery of the king's right-hand man. First, this is too public to play a place for what will have to be revealed. Second, she knows the king's affinity to special dinners. Plus, his queen invites him and Haman to attend what has been prepared. Sometimes we just need to privately make our requests known to the King of Kings. Sometimes there are things that I need to talk to God about that I don't want to talk to anybody else about. I don't even want them to know that I've asked God for specific things. There was a plot that had been revealed in chapter 7, 1 through 10. Then the king Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he? Where is he that durst presume in his heart to do this? She told him the plot that Haman had plotted against Mordecai and against all the Jews. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. See, she invited him into dinner. Several events occur between the first banquet and the second banquet, and if you would just do well to read the entire book of Esther. It's not all that long, and you would just, all these that is skipped in our lesson, they will all tie you in, and you see, not the first banquet did she reveal the plan, but the second banquet she did. First, Haman, with the support of his wife, Zeresh, commissions a 75-foot gallows to be built for his intent to hang Mordecai. Second, King Ahasuerus has Haman to honor Mordecai for his foiling an earlier assassination attempt. And at this point, Zeresh and Haman's wise men state that his attempts to destroy Mordecai have failed. The king had Haman to honor Mordecai for his foiling an earlier assassination against the king. At the second banquet, the king desires to know Esther's petition. His wording again includes the concept of half of his kingdom. This time she answers with great tact and feeling. She raises questions instead of giving a solid answer. Her initial approach is to ask for her life and the life of her people. In verse 4, she indicates they've been sold for destruction. Haman's name comes to the forefront only when Ahasuerus asks who and where is the man who could presume to bring about such a despicable deed that targets his own queen. Where is he that would even consider doing such a horrible thing that would involve my queen? Esther's response not only indicates Haman, but also reveals her Jewish identity. See, up until this point, Ahasuerus didn't know that his queen was a Jew. The king leaves the room. And then, in the king's absence, Haman makes a desperate attempt to save his own life as Esther reclines on the couch. He literally falls on her. This act is in complete opposition to proper etiquette toward the member of the king's harem, including the queen, and it seals his fate. Having been informed of the gallows prepared for Mordecai, the king orders Haman to be hanged on the gallows that was prepared for Mordecai. You say, okay, what's there in that right there? Well, to me, there's a whole big old lesson right there in that. His right-hand man had tricked him into signing a letter that meant all the Jews were going to do, and he learns that his queen is a Jew. He leaves the room, and then he comes back, and Haman, in all of his disturbed feeling, knowing he's been caught, falls across Esther, and that really sealed his fate when the king comes back in the room. When God speaks, oftentimes his voice will call for an act of courage on our part. He felt like some of us do sometimes. Okay, I'm out of here. I can't take any more. But he died on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Good always triumphs over evil. On that day, in chapter 8, 1 through 17, on that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Good always triumphs over evil. We know it to be sure in the afterlife. However, we can never forget that it also occurs in this earthly life as God fulfills his word and rewarding the righteous living in various ways. This can be seen clearly in the lives of Esther and Mordecai. Now Mordecai is over all the things that Haman had been over. Esther can now reveal her true identity to her king, and she is a Jew, and she has saved all of her people. It appears that all the property of a condemned criminal automatically reverted to the king, but yet he turned around and gave it all to Mordecai, needing someone to administer her newly acquired wealth. Then Esther places Mordecai as the administrator. Ahasuerus now elevates Mordecai to the same position that had been held by Haman. God will move you up if you stand true to him, and if you have courage in the face of difficulties. The principal act of courage is to endure and withstand dangers doggedly rather than to attack them. Sometimes we just have to stand still and have courage. The king said to Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I've given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Now you say, well, that was all in the Old Testament, and that was the Jews, and all of that happened for them. Listen, we are God's people too, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. The exposure of Haman gets the problem out in the open, but does not resolve it. Laws or decrees made by the king could not be revoked regardless of a change in circumstances. So once again, Esther presents herself before the king, pleading that there be some way to reverse what had been set in motion. Ahasuerus' decision to allow Mordecai to write letters to all the provinces, providing the means to preserve the Jews. Mordecai's solution is to allow the Jews to band together, defend themselves against any of the enemies who would attempt to fulfill Haman's previous decree. Fearing the new power of the Jews, a lot of the people became Jews themselves. The enemy would love to destroy us. It has always been Satan's intent to destroy us. But sometimes just one person standing strong in the Lord and having courage can prevent God's people from destruction. And I wrote a little note, and I'm going to leave you with this thought. Do we live Christian lives that would cause people to fear the power of God that they see in us? That's an important thought. Are our lives so full of the power of God that people they would fear the power that we have when they see the power of God in us? I hope you enjoyed our lesson today. I wanted us to talk about courage because all the things that's going on in our world today, they are so rampant and people are being destroyed on every hand. So take courage. Jesus is soon coming, and he could come any day now. Have a great day in the Lord, and I'll see you next Sunday. I love you, but remember, God loves you too.